All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to IT4U. I'm your host, Jean Mackey. So these are live webinars brought to you by Information and Technology Services. And if you are having any trouble with audio or video during the live webinar, just let us know in the chat pod. If you're watching the caption version, check the description and you'll see a link to a Google Doc with resources. We'll have that up for you all within the next week. And if you do need an accommodation to participate in the live webinar, just give us a little bit of a heads up. And today we've got Traci Buckner from UHR. We cajoled her into coming over here. She's going to talk to you about the human resource data sets. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Traci.
Thanks, Jean. So today I'm glad to be able to present to all of you a little bit of what I know about the human resources data set. So today we're going to start with an overview of the data environments. We'll talk about the different universes that exist, the data structure. We'll look at creating your own user-defined report. And if we have time, we'll talk about some of the predefined reports and also some other resources that you can use. Starting off with the different reporting environments that we have that provide access to HR data. We have the OLTP, which is the Online Transaction Processing System, which is also known as the front end or PeopleSoft. This is where data is live. This is where all of the transactions are entered. And we have PS Query, which is the main tool that is used to access the data from this particular environment, which is mostly given to central HR, the central offices, and ITS has access. In order for the rest of our community to have access to report, we have the data warehouse, which is read only. It gives you access to the different data sets for HR, and you can access it via business objects and some other query tool that you may prefer to use as well. A good thing about the data warehouse is that it does have some predefined reports, and we always recommend that you check to see if there's a predefined report that can provide the data that you are looking for whatever your business need may be. Next up, the different universes for HR data. We have the HRL universe, which is also known as legacy. It provides a historical analysis from November 1978 to June 30th, 2001. And then we have the current data source that we have, the HRO1 universe, where you can analyze data from July 1, 2001 forward. And then we also have the HRO2 universe, which is known as HR Snap or the snapshot, where you can find data as of the first of the current month and annual November snapshots going back to 2001. Now, for the refresh schedule, as if you don't know, this is, like I said, just a copy of production data. It's a snapshot of the production data. So the legacy data set, HRL01, is no longer refreshed. The HRO1 data set, which has our current data, is refreshed every evening. So it's refreshed daily. And that's something to keep in mind so that if you're running a query today and then you run it tomorrow and you find that there are changes to your results, you need to keep in mind that the data was refreshed. There may have been some changes or some updates made to the data, or there may be some retroactivity, things of that nature, just to keep in mind if you're looking at your results and you're seeing some differences from day to day. Then we also have the HRO2 or snapshot, which is refreshed monthly on the first work day of the month. And you're going to find data as of the first for the current month, and the previous month will be replaced. So come May, the April snapshot will be replaced with the May snapshot. This is true for all months except for November, where we save off those particular snapshots. So the types of data that you can find across the different snapshots, I thought this would be helpful to explain to you today, is of course you're going to find faculty and staff across all of our data sets and grad students as well. For temporary staff, you're only going to find temps included in the HRO1 universe. And I have an asterisk there because We do not consider HR data to be the authoritative source for temporary staff. We consider payroll data to be the authoritative source because we figure if a temporary employee is still being paid, then they're active. As some of you may know, we have a temporary purge process that runs that will terminate temps who haven't been paid um, prior to the actual batch load taking place or being uploaded into the system. Many of our units do not terminate their temporary employees in the system. And so we have the batch load process that helps to get them terminated and out of the system. So that's why we consider payroll to be the authoritative source for temporary staff. So you want to keep that in mind. You're going to find our retired and terminated employees that are available in our legacy data, of course, and the current data set. You're also going to be able to find leave data in all three data sets. You will not be able to find any grievance data. You won't find home address in any of our data sets. You also won't find any of our recruitment data in the data warehouse. That's not included as well. You will find work address, though, in our current data set, HR01, and also in the snapshot. And of course, you'll find demographic information for all of our employees within all of the different data sets. So next, we're going to talk about the structure, and I'll explain to you how to go about the process of writing a query in HR01 or HR02.
Traci,
Yes.
People are asking where they can find these slides, and we can share them right when we
Yes,
send them out.
we can definitely share the slides. I'll be sure to do that. For both HR01 and HR02, you'll find the primary folders as I have listed here. They're the same. And so what I'm going to do next is go through each of the primary folders and give you an idea of what type of data you can find. Yes, Chief.
Question, what's the significance of retaining the November snapshot? Why do they do it that way?
Good question. The November snapshot is retained because for my department, we are responsible for doing institutional reporting on an annual basis. And November 1st is the as of date of the data that needs to be submitted to different agencies and to the government, to the state, for our reporting purposes to make sure that we're compliant and providing data. So November 1 is the as of date. So the snapshots are saved because that's basically, I guess, a historical reference that we can go back to. It also provides a good way for us, or easy way, to do trending analysis as well, so that we can see from November to November to November, has there been any changes in our FTEs or in the head counts or in the different job families or job codes that we may have in our department, or salaries. So that's why we have the November's snapshots saved off. Okay. So back to our primary folders. First, we'll talk about person data. This is any data that it relates to you as an individual. Your name, your ethnicity, your visa permit data, your gender, your unique name, anything that you need to pull that relates to an individual, you'll find it in person data. So if you're thinking about writing a query that may help you in your DE&I planning, so you're going to be looking at gender and you're going to be looking at ethnicity, then you'll know, okay, I can find that in-person data because that's about the individual employee. And speaking of personal data, I just want to bring to your attention and to remind you that many of the fields that are considered personal data are considered to be sensitive as well. It's sensitive data, so we need to handle it very carefully. In my area, when we are asked to provide reports, we are very careful about not linking the name to any of the other fields that are listed below. If we have to link the name, then we do not email the results. We do not send the results to our customers via email. We will upload them to Inbox and share it that way. We're very, very careful about making sure that we don't have any data breaches with this sensitive data, because we know in this day and age, Yeah, there's so much that's going on, illegal activity that's going on with our own personal information. So I had to put this slide in here just to remind you all that we all need to be careful about the data that we're sharing and how we're sharing it. So the next type of data is job data, and this is information that pertains to your appointment. So your job title, your department, the campus that you work on, your full-time rate, your FTE. So this is actually one of the highest used tables in the HR data set, the HRO1 data set, and HRO2 as well, only because it has such a wealth of information about appointments. And most of the time, we're reporting on appointments. So, in most cases, you'll probably most definitely start with this particular folder as you're writing your queries. One thing, a question that we always seem to get, is about effective dates. There seems to be a lot of confusion about that. A lot of the tables you'll find in the HR data sets will have effective dates, a begin date and an end date, or an effective date and an end date. And that only helps us to keep track of when a transaction is effective. It allows us, when we're writing queries, to pull historical data, current data, and even future data if we have any future dated rows in the system. Um, each date can have multiple transactions. So that's where the effective sequence number comes into play. It is a field or an identifier that is assigned automatically by PeopleSoft, and it basically allows for more than one transaction to be effective on a particular date. One thing to keep in mind is that if you do not condition on a effective date, it's quite possible that you will get all rows or a lot more data than you intended to receive in the results of your query. So effective dates are your friend. If you don't remember anything else from this webinar, remember effective dates are your friend.
If we have any questions, ask.
Okay, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat. And if I don't know the answer, I promise to get the answer to you, and they'll be added in the resources. And to take this a step further, because it's so important, there are different ways to use the criteria to pull data as of a date or as of a range in time. And I have the syntax here on this slide. It's something that you will definitely get used to as you're using the data set more and more. And this is primarily for the HRO1 universe. And to drive it home even more, because it is so important. One thing I do want to bring to your attention, and it's highlighted in the yellow box, is that sometimes you'll see a date 9/9/3999. That just is a default that is used to let us know that we don't know when an appointment is closed. It's like an open-ended date. That's basically what it means. It's an open-ended appointment or an open-ended transaction. We don't know when, say, the salary is going to change again. So the salary is going to be what it is until we get a new effective date. So 9/9/3999 is basically, once again, a default for something that is open-ended. And we can see also that with the dates, we can use different combinations depending on how complex your query is. You can embed date criteria in different ways using and or statements. You can use between, you can use equal to, not equal to. It just depends on what your business needs are. And here is that infamous job effective sequence prompt that you'll see whenever you run a query that uses job data. You have two options, either the maximum sequence or all sequences. In most cases, you're going to select the maximum sequence because that is going to give you the most recent current data that exists for a person. If you're going to use all sequences, you would do that if, say, you're trying to do some analysis on the transactions for a particular person or maybe two people, because all sequences means that you're going to receive in your results every single transaction as of the date that you put in for your criteria. So, like I said, this is helpful if you're trying to see, okay, when did I put in the data change for their salary? When did I put in the rehire? When did I submit? So that's where the all sequences comes in. But most of the time, you're going to want to select max sequence. Yes, Jean.
So Dan wants to know, when should one use the effective date / job end date versus appointment dates?
Okay, good question. The appointment dates apply to your specific appointment. The job effective date and the job end date are sort of like the controlling dates for the job data table. So we will always use the job effective date and the job end date when we're trying to pull data from the job table as of a particular date. Um, you can use the appointment begin and end date if you're trying to find people who have appointments as of a particular date. So that's the main difference. The job effective date and job end date, they pretty much control the data within the job table. So that's when the transactions were entered into the system or are effective. So there's the difference. The appointment date is just about your appointment. The job effective date has to do with controlling the job data table. So it's at a higher hierarchy, I'd say. The next data type is job compensation data, and that is really simple to explain. There's two subtables here. One is the Department Budget Earnings, which is also known as DBE, which help us to see information about your regular pay. And then we have another subfolder, which is called addle pay data or additional pay. Sometimes it's just called addle pay, and that gives you details about someone's additional pay. And so you'll be able to find the short code that it's paid out of. You'll also be able to find the funding department. And I want to make a note here that the funding department may not necessarily be the same as the appointing department. The appointing department is basically where a person's appointment is. The funding department is who is paying for that particular appointment. And you will find that in some cases, those departments can be different. There is an additional pay earn code that will give you the reason why someone is receiving additional pay. And there's also an earn code that just tells you basically the background. Is it regular pay? Is it vacation pay? Things of that nature. So that's the pretty much the main categories of data: personal data, job data, and job compensation data. So when you're writing your own queries, you need to think, is the information that I need about the person? Then I can go find the field in person data. Is it about the appointment or about the job? Then I can go find the fields in job data. Is it about their money? Do I need more details, the short code or the funding department? Then I need to go and look in job compensation data. Another question that we get sometimes is about the standalone folders. What's that all about? So these are basically folders that contain description tables. They exist primarily for administrative purposes, and you want to leave them alone. Pretty much, they stand alone all by themselves for a reason. There are no joins between the folders or between the fields or tables in this particular folder and person data, job data, or job compensation data. They just are just description tables. You don't want to include them in your query that may use person data, job data, or job compensation data. They stand alone, just let them stand alone. And lastly, we have the report objects folder, which provides different fields that are helpful in building more complex reports. One of the fields that I do want to bring to your attention is called today's date. This is extremely helpful if you're writing a query and you know you're going to run it more than once. You're going to run it or you have it scheduled to run. And when you run it, you want to return results as of today's date. So instead of going in and editing the your criteria in your query, or instead of adding a prompt, you can very easily use this particular object to complete your statement for your job effective date equal to today's date, or your job end date equal to today's date. It just makes things a lot easier for you. And similarly, we have two other objects that provide the previous 2 months begin date or the previous 2 months end date. So it's going to look at today's date and make that calculation for you automatically and go back or go forward 2 months. And the other folders, like I said, they just allow you to add blanks and nulls if you need to build more complex queries. And if you need to do that, then you may want to get the training guide for business objects to figure out how to do that. It's not that intuitive, but it works. It works. So when you're building queries in HR data, you always want to think, okay, am I going to be providing a detailed list? Is it going to be aggregate data, or do I want to look at some trends? If it's detailed, then you can use HRO1 and HRO2. Aggregate data, of course, HRO1 and HRO2 can be used as well. But for trends, the HRO2 data set would be extremely helpful in producing trend data as of November. Since we have snapshots going back to 2001, you can see a trends from 2001 up until actually 2017, because we're not in November 2018 yet. So those are some questions that you need to ask yourself to help guide you to where do I start? What do I need to use? Another helpful tool that I still use and I recommend that you use is the data dictionary. It is extremely helpful. It has a list of the fields. It tells you if the field is sensitive. It tells you also where those fields are located. It also gives you a brief description and even a sample of the data that you can find in that particular field. So the data dictionary is your friend. Also, yes.
And I'm going to send them a link to that.
Okay.
And then there's a question, can you please show an example query of today's report for DBE?
Today's report for DBE.
We're not quite sure.
Not sure what you're asking.
We need a little more detail.
Yeah, so while they're giving more detail, I'll continue on with this slide.
Okay.
As you're writing your user-defined report, you want to make sure that you start simple. I always say add the basic or the core of your query before you start getting too fancy. And then another thing that's important is that you know that you should know your department's or your unit's data. So you'll know that if you're writing a query, you look at your results and you have 50 people in your results and you know there's only 10 people in your department, then you'll know that something is missing from your query. You may have missed adding a date field to your criteria or the info status field to your criteria as well. Another thing that you want to do is to consider using test cases to verify your queries, so that if you know that you were hired as of, say, in 2010, and you want to see who else was hired in 2010, then you can look up, use yourself to test your query to make sure that you are actually in the results. Some very important fields to keep in mind as you're writing queries using HRO1 is the job effective date and the job end date. Like once again, those control the job data table. So you're saying whenever you use these two fields, you're going to be telling business objects pretty much, I want to see data as of this particular date. Okay. Another field that will be very important is the reg temp field. It allows you to tell business objects that you only want to see regular employees or you want to see temporary employees in your results. And keep in mind, the temporaries, we don't consider HR to be the authoritative source for temp appointments. Another field is the info status field. This is the field that can be used to tell business objects whether you want to see people who have active appointments, appointments that are on leave with pay, people who are retired, people who may be on short work break. So the info status is something that will be extremely handy, especially if you're just trying to create a list that shows active employees in your department. Um, the next field, the job indicator, comes into play if you know that you have people who have multiple appointments and you're trying to determine which appointment is primary versus which is secondary or tertiary. Then the job indicator field will give you that information. And then lastly, to note, the class indicator allows us to tell if an appointment is their regular appointment, is it an overload appointment, is it their summer appointment. So that's another field that I wanted to bring to your attention that I thought would be helpful. And so before we go to looking at some of the user-defined queries, I know that we had a question that came from the pre-webinar query that was sent out. Someone asked, how could this help them as an HR professional? And I just want to let you know that, of course, it would allow you to make decisions for your department using data, HR data, and to have data to back up your decision, and also to have data to analyze the impact of any decisions that have been made. On a personal note, I would say that it's important to use HR data just because it allows you to branch out and to really grow and to develop professionally in your career here at the university. I always tell people, you can't break it. You're not going to mess up the data if you're using business objects to pull data, or if you're using the data warehouse. You're not going to break it. A lot of people have a lot of some fear behind not using or writing reports or running reports. Just keep in mind, you can't break it. It's okay to go ahead and jump in. And I actually recommend that you jump in and use this as much as possible. So before I get into the user-defined and predefined reports, there are some other data sources that you can find on the UHR Information Services website. We have quite a few reports that are out there that have been produced either in PDFs or mostly in Tableau. So I want to bring that to your attention as well. Yes, Jean.
Oh, so clarification on the earlier question. Query for today's DBE allocations for a funding depth ID. That's something we need to get back to later.
Yeah, that's definitely a lot more complex than what I was planning to do for today's demo. So, but that is something that I guess I can write and share some kind of way.
Yeah,
We'll figure
so
it out.
user shared.
Okay,
So we'll follow up.
we'll follow up definitely. So today I thought that we would just pull a list of current employees just to show you basically how I go through the process of writing a report in HR data. So because of I know what I know that most of the fields that I'm going to need to use are stored in the job folder. And most of the time we usually pull the employee ID number into our results only because it helps us if we have to go into Wolverine Access to verify what we find in our results. Um, I know that I need to use the job effective date and job end date. And since I want to pull data as of today, here's the syntax. Job effective date to be less than or equal to, and job end date should be greater than or equal to. And because I mentioned the today's date object, why don't we go ahead and use that? You find that by selecting object from this query, go to report objects, select today's date. Same thing for the job end date, report objects, today's date. So now if I were to run this report, I will not do that. I will get a list of every employee ID number as of today's date. So that would be quite a bit of data that we don't want to sit and wait around to get results. So I am going to run it for my unit. So I'm going to pull in the appointing department group. And I'm going to use the list of values. There's no sense in me trying to memorize codes. Nowadays, we have the list of values to help us. And I like to use the search box here at the bottom. And I'm just going to type in human. And I'm going to use University Human Resources. Pop that in and click OK. So now I would get, as of today's date, every employee ID number that had an appointment within human resources, whether it's active or terminated or regular or temporary. But I just want to pull in regular employees, so I'll pull in the reg temp field. And just because I know what the code is, it's capital R, I'm just going to type that in. And next I want active, so I'm going to use the info status field. Drag that in. And just to show you the list of values, you can see the different options that we have for this field. But I just want a list of actives. Okay. And why don't we go ahead and add the departments as well? And how about the job code description, job family description, and how about the years in service? This is a calculated field, and once we run this report, I believe I'm good. We're going to run it, see what happens. We're going to be prompted for, here's that effective sequence prompt. I want to use max sequence. And then we have an enter as of date prompt as well. This is associated with the calculated field for years in service. So what it's going to do is take a look at each individual service date, and it will calculate their use in service using the date that I provide. And I'm going to use as of today's date. Run it. And so here we go. We have our results here. I usually get rid of that. And we have a list of all the employees in UHR along with their calculated years in service. I can very sensitive trying to expand it. So, but you get the gist. Okay. So that's one very simplified, very easy query. But the process is basically thinking, okay, first of all, where are the fields located? Where are the fields? It also helps with business objects that you can search. If you're looking for fields, you can type here and say annual, or if I'm looking for the full-time rate, then I can select from the FTR rate or the comp rate. And so that helps things when you're writing your queries as well. I'm going to close out of this. And then I want to show a predefined report. We have time to do that?
We do, yeah.
Okay. Those are stored under folders. You want to go to public folders, maintained. Then we have human resources. And let's take a look at a report that was written in HR02. And there is a report that will show you the trend of FTEs by a funding department group. So we're going to run that once it comes up. And I'm going to refresh. And you'll notice that there isn't a date prompt or an effective sequence prompt, is because you have to keep in mind that these are the HR02 data set is based on snapshots. So it's already taken care of for you. You don't really have to worry about that. You also need to keep in mind is that you're not going to find any temporary employees in Snapshot. You're not going to find anyone who's terminated. You're just going to find active employees on leave or on leave with pay. And that's all you're going to find. So it really helps to lessen the number of criteria, or the amount of criteria that you have to add to your report. And because I know that we have some changes to our code and I want the full history, I'm going to add 2 codes. just to get the full gist of what our trending analysis looks like for FTEs. Yes, Jean.
Two questions. Is there a field indicator that will allow us to identify transfer date from one unit to another? Sometimes the appointment date or years in the title is not sufficient or accurate.
That's a very complex query. We have tried to figure that out ourselves, and we found that um, a lot of times you just have to look sort of like at creating snapshots of data. So you can compare one snapshot to another. And you can do that using the job effective date would help you to determine when they transferred. Um, if you like more information on that, um, can I tell them to send me an email?
Sure.
Send me an email. My unique name is Buck, Buck, and we can talk a little bit more about that, most definitely. Yes, Jean.
Couple more.
Hmm.
Dan wants to know, is the best way to tell if an employee is active, is it via active job entry, effective date / job end, or is there another status or indicator elsewhere?
The combination of codes that you would need are the IMPL status, which will be equal to A. So that's going to tell you if the appointment is active. You'll also need to decide as of what date do you want to know that they were active. And that's where the job effective date and the job end date would come into play.
And say more about when you use HR Snap, as an
Okay.
example.
HR Snap, we would definitely use it like what I'm showing here on the screen. If you're trying to look at trends, we're doing some trend analysis, or even if you know that you need to write a real quick query, we call them a quick and dirty query, as of the first of the month, then you can use the current month snapshot to write that query. But keep in mind, you're only going to find in your results employees who are active on leave or on leave with pay, and it's just regular employees, no temporary employees. But we find that it is extremely helpful if you're doing some type of trend analysis. So as you can see, going from November 2001 to November 2017 and the current month, we can see the differences in the FTEs. And of course, it doesn't just have to be FTEs, it could be head counts. You could be looking across demographic information as well. You can be looking at the average salary. Another good thing about SNAP is that we have extra calculated fields that are built in. So you'll be able to find the minimum and the maximum or the average of different fields, and you won't have to write that code yourself. So those are a few other reasons why to use SNAP.
And let me also say that I'm going to send a link to an e-learning course in my link that goes over some of this too.
Okay, great, great. Okay. So basically, I think that's all that I have. Jean, if there are any other questions, you can send them in chat. If not, you can directly contact me directly at buck@umich.edu. And also, for those of you who may be interested, my area, we do consulting as well. And from time to time, I'm called out to do some instructor-led training, and we're glad to do that to help you as you're working in HR data. So thank you so much for your attention and for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Tracy. Mm-hmm. I think we might have to bring her back.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Where the heck am I here? Here I am. So we want to thank you. We're going to put a link to the polls in the chat pod. It's not terribly elegant, but we would love if you would give us a little feedback. I am going to send you, once we get the recording of this session captioned, I'll send out a link to that in YouTube, and I'll also send you a Google Doc with a bunch of resource links. And I think we're about done here. Thank you very much.